and by the time I get done, I think we'll have most of our audience here. So, good afternoon, everybody. My name's Tyler Nuttall. I am the Vice President on the board of Georgia Geospatial Association. I want to thank you for taking time out of your day to be here today. I just want to give some quick updates and information on the Georgia Geospatial side. First off, if you're new here, who we are at Georgia Geospatial, we're a network of geospatial professionals providing resources to government and private sectors across the state while collaborating with educators to develop the next generation of geospatial experts. So we're a great networking organization for GIS professionals, a great place to meet others and learn and come together in the state of Georgia to bring GIS to that next level and bring yourself to that next level. I do want to highlight really quick that we do have a conference coming up in September at Jekyll Island from September 15th to 17th. So please go to our website and go to the conference page where you can register. If you register as a speaker, you do get a discounted rate. And we're also looking for speakers still, and we're also looking for sponsors. So if you go to our website, you can find that information. We're also going to have awards at our conference this year. So I want to highlight this real quick. We have a place on our website where you can submit for the awards. And it looks like, thank you, Nathan, for putting those in the chat. We have a Lifetime Achievement Award. Joel Logan, are you on the call? I see you're here. Joel, if you're here, do you mind unmuting and reminding me kind of the definition of each of these categories of awards that we're going to have at the conference this year?
Sure. Can you hear me talking?
Yeah, I can hear you, Joel.
So it's pretty self-explanatory. The Lifetime Achievement Award is to recognize someone that's been in our field at least, I believe, 20 to 25 years. The Geospatial Navigator Award is an award targeted at an outstanding individual member of GGA. And then, of course, the Geospatial Organization of Excellence Award is for an organization. The only one requirement, though, is you do need to be a member of GGA in the organization. Does too. We're taking nominations till July the 31st. So I encourage everybody, if there's somebody you feel is deserving of this award, please make sure they're nominated by the end of the month.
Awesome. Thanks, Joel, for sharing that. And of course, please, we encourage you all to become members of GGA if you're not already. And then Trip, I see you're on the call. Trip, did you have anything you want to add today to the folks that are in attendance?
Yeah, sure. So first off, glad everybody's here. I appreciate all the support you're showing GGA. As president, it means a lot. I do really want to encourage the conference. It has been a long time since we've had a statewide GIS conference here. I think 2017 was the last one we did. We were planning one in 2020, but we all kind of know what happened then. So it is really a great way to share what you're doing with others. So submit those abstracts. Do not be scared to present. It's not a horrible thing. Trust me. I know I do it a lot. But you'd be surprised. I know a lot of folks are like, oh, I'm not really doing a lot. I'm doing this very simple thing. Well, what's simple to you is not always simple to everyone else. So don't just assume that what you're doing, everybody else knows how to do, no matter how simple or mundane you may think it is. So please get out there, share it. And as Tyler was saying, it's a great opportunity to network with your fellow GIS practitioners and professionals across the state here. You know, we have 159 counties. We're the largest state east of the Mississippi. So, you know, just seeing all the wide ranging uses from what they're doing down at the coast, then into the middle part with the plains, and then up into the mountains of Georgia. There's just so much amazing work we're doing. So yeah, come down, see everything, interact with your fellow professionals. You know, having your network is just, I can't really highlight the importance of that and what it can do for your career growth and whatnot. So yeah, please get signed up. It's going to be a fun time. It's going to be a great learning experience. You won't regret it. So
yeah. Thanks, Trip. And traditionally, this conference happens every other year, and we're going to keep that cadence. So that means next year, there's not going to be an Esri Southeast User Conference in Georgia. There's not going to be this conference, Georgia Geospatial Conference in Georgia. So that means next year there's not going to be any GIS conferences happening in Georgia. So this is kind of like your last chance until 2027 to attend a Georgia-focused GIS conference. And with all that information, I want to hand it over to our guest speaker, Tim Johnson, former North Carolina GIO. And he's here today to talk to us about some great work and the stories he has to share um, from his time in North Carolina. Now retired, right, Tim?
Well, my wife would tell you that I'm semi-retired, and some days not retired at all. So, I really appreciate the opportunity to join you and the invitation to do so. I don't think I would ever get tired of talking to you about my home state and what it means to be a part of the GIS community. But I guess the good news to start with is that everyone can build their GIS community to be what they want it to be, and it takes lots of collaboration. There's nothing magic about it. It's something that you have to work at, and I think we've done a fairly good job. We haven't solved everything, but we've solved a number of things. And once we, as a community, really got down to talking and listening to each other, things changed. I don't want to give away the whole presentation, so I'll just say that for now. So again, great to be with you. What I plan to do over the next hour or so is basically condense about 45 to 50 years of experiences into an hour. So I'm going to hit some highlights. I'm going to share some things that I think are important for you to know, and things that I'm proud of and challenges that we overcame. Honestly, the events in Texas with the flooding, really bad experience down there. It reminded me first of Hurricane Helene in Western North Carolina just this past fall. But it also reminded me of Hurricane Floyd in North Carolina that hit Eastern North Carolina in 1999. And it was devastating in significant ways. But out of a really bad event came something good. And that good thing was once the governor asked about where the flood insurance maps were, and he was shown maps that were dated, decades earlier. We knew we had something we needed to improve upon. NASA had just released this new technology called LIDAR that nobody knew anything about. Some people were skeptical of it, but it turned out to be the right technology solution. But it took a lot of collaboration to create that first LIDAR data set in the early 2000s. It took investment from FEMA, from the state legislature, and support from the governor. And the GIS community at that time, the state and local community, came together to help the state achieve that. Out of bad things can come good things. LIDAR is commonplace now, as you all know. It's in your car, it's everywhere, but it took some courage, and that word you're going to hear a couple of times in the next little bit. It took some courage for the legislature to fund some of that work. We had to convince them that it was worthy of being funded, because that first LIDAR data set was on the order of $70 million statewide, so not a small amount. So I'll just wrap up that piece of what I'm going to share with you with the events of today. Certainly hoping that the folks in Texas and the folks in Western North Carolina, honestly, will continue to improve on their situation, and something good will come out of something bad. So with that, I'm going to jump in. The overall message today is collaboration is really the key. It's rarely about the technology or technical matters that keep us from succeeding as a community. It's about collaborating and doing it in a meaningful way, such that you build relationships, and those relationships lead to opportunities that allow you to make progress. So I'll stop there with that and just say, buckle up and let's enjoy the ride. So let me figure out. Okay, here we go. So are you seeing the screen the right way?
Not yet.
Hopefully you're seeing a slide here shortly. No?
Not yet, nope.
Okay. We'll try again.
Yeah, this is the fun of using multiple web meeting applications between Teams, Zoom, Google Meets, and so on. Trying to figure out where the share button is.
How about now?
Now we see your presentation mode. So we see your notes and the slide. We do see the slide now, but we're seeing all the notes and stuff with it.
What about now? Is that just a slide?
No,
No, we're
still-
seeing your mouse pointer.
Yeah, it's still notes mode.
I'm going to turn off presenter mode then. What about now?
No, it's still seeing the PowerPoint window that's showing your notes and everything too. Is it on another screen? Are you working off one screen?
I'm working off of two and should be presenting. Okay. Let's see.
All right,
Yeah.
now we're good.
Finally.
And
Okay.
I'll edit out the recording and all the rest of that stuff.
It's okay. All right. So let's move forward. So this is one of my favorite quotes. Courage is what it takes to stand up and speak, and courage is also what it takes to sit down and listen. So this may sound courage. So what does courage have to do with GIS and geospatial and collaboration? Well, I think it takes courage to make steps forward, especially bold steps, when there's no precedent for making those steps. And I'll save the courage is what it takes to sit down and listen until later. So I'll leave you in a little bit of suspense. How's that? Want to cover just some early things within the GIS history and background in North Carolina. So background-wise, the state first invested in geospatial in the 1970s. It was a result of a legislative action called the Land Policy Act of 1974. Before my time, I was a kid in high school at that time, so I had absolutely nothing to do with it. But what it called for was creating a GIS database to look at land resources for the state. A little agency called Land Resources Information Service was created. That became the agency that I was a part of until a few months ago, and eventually became the Center for Geographic Information and Analysis. So that beginning, unfortunately, ended abruptly because the next legislative session, they rescinded the Land Policy Act of 1974. So in rescinding the act, they were basically sending a message: we're not going to do statewide land use planning. But they allowed LRS, this little agency, to stay and work on GIS and build the core technology and data sets in that era, that 1 to 250,000 scale data sets to represent the features statewide. It also took away the legislative funding that went with the Land Policy Act, so it pushed the agency into cost recovery, service delivery kind of mode where we had to make our own way basically and pay for everything ourselves, which is not a good way to run, but it was easier to run a service back in that era when GIS was new. And I'll say that, GIS was new then because only a couple of other states were really doing it. Minnesota and New York were two along the same time that we were involved in it. And the technology was far from proven to work at a statewide level. Some national organizations were using it, such as the U.S. Geological Survey and possibly some others, U.S. Forest Service possibly. But it really wasn't a widespread used technology, so it was not proven. So it took courage to continue to invest in it. But that's the step that we took back in the 1977 and early 1980s period. Simultaneously to that Land Policy Act and the creation of LRIS was a separate, not connected at all, honestly, an effort to modernize land records at the county level. So this effort was driven by an interest by the legislature to make land records consistent across the state, and they provided funding to county governments and technical assistance to county governments to accomplish that. So eventually that led to a common standard for parcel mapping, which is, as you know, is a very fundamental step you need to make to ensure consistency of the mapping effort across counties. So those two kind of landmark efforts really formed the foundation. Also part of the foundation in North Carolina, this is still true today in talking with other states, is the public records law. The public records law in North Carolina basically says thou shalt share data that's been paid for by the taxpayer unless it's confidential or personal in nature, such as your income or your health records and those kinds of things. So that was really always in the back of our minds as we look to make data available, GIS data available across the state. We knew the public records law was going to be an underpinning of whatever we did. So you were only allowed to charge for a copy of the data, and a copy of the data back in the day was not digital necessarily. It was literally the data on some early physical media such as 9-track tapes. I know that doesn't mean anything to a lot of you, but I remember those. But that's the way it could be provided. Eventually, everything moved to digital, of course, in a way that is commonplace today, of course. Still, some counties wanted to be able to charge more than the cost of a copy for access to their data because they had invested hundreds of thousands of dollars and potentially millions of dollars in the development of their GIS data. So they got an exception from the legislature to do that. So they were able to recoup some of their real costs of developing and maintaining the data. I would say that was probably less than 20 of the 100 counties in North Carolina. And, it was really overcome by events, i.e. The internet in probably 25 or so years ago. So that exception is still in the books because I checked not long ago, but it's really not relevant anymore. So public records law driving it, those two pieces of legislation that created the state GIS and the land records pieces were really fundamental to what we eventually became as a state. Without those things and without this law, things could have taken a very different turn, or maybe not have developed until after the turn of the 21st century. I mentioned the transition from LRIS to CGIA that occurred in 1991 as a result of creation of our state council under executive order. The original mission, as you know, is from the earlier slide, is to build GIS data across the state. So we basically built data sets based on what clients such as the DOT, DENR, various other state entities wanted to see us develop. So the data in some ways didn't have a particular structure or an order to it, which we built what we were paid to build. We had some funding from the USGS to do creation of 1 to 100,000 scale roads and streams and boundaries and those kinds of things. But that was really the only source of some of that fundamental funding for those data sets. And then things changed significantly after 1991 with the creation of this collaborative body that I'm going to talk about next. And I'll go into some depth as to how the council was started and then how it evolved. So the state council in 1991 was created to basically solve a problem. And the problem was a budgetary problem. The problem was state agencies were beginning to discover this technology called GIS, and they were investing in it. And sometimes they were investing in this, creating the same data multiple times. And once the state budget office got a sense of that being the case, they wanted to nip it in the bud, basically. So the council was a way to bring the state agencies to the table, push them to share what they were doing, create one approach, not 6 approaches to developing the same data set. So that original version of the council, through executive order, and throughout the 1990s, honestly, was just state agencies with, I think, 17 members, with maybe 3 of the members being local government oriented, the Association of County Commissioners and the League of Municipalities. So it was very heavy state government, because that's what the state budget office, which was kind of running the show in the background, so to speak, wanted to see come out of the council. And that continued for a decade. We accomplished some things. We set some directions for imagery. We, as state agencies, were talking to each other, trying to look at ways to work together. But it was kind of hit or miss, honestly. And then things changed again. The council had been through several executive orders in the 90s, and every time a new governor comes in, you've got to kind of restart your council, which is not a good place to be in to sustain momentum for big things like the major data sets that need to be invested in. So the chair of the council at that time, a lady by the name of Jane Patterson, who was the governor's technology advisor, and forward-thinking member of the legislature at the time, his name was Eric Reeve, decided they were going to put this in statute. And they were bold. They had courage to turn an executive order into a legislative authority. Now, part of the rest of the story is the legislature agreed to do this, but they weren't going to give it any money. So we created this larger version of the council that I'll get into in a moment, but no money was going to go with it, which was disappointing, but not a deal breaker. The services business on our side was sufficient to sustain supporting the council until the council got really, really, really productive, which occurred a little bit later, as you'll see in the timeline. But we wanted to get the council in statute because we thought, and I think it was accurate at the time, we thought that having it in statute would give it more prominence, give it more recognition across the stakeholder community, not just among the state agencies, but local governments, the private sector, the university system, the whole gamut of potential stakeholders for any of the initiatives we might take on. So the council turned from a 17-member body to a 34-member body, and those extra 17 members were basically the local governments in North Carolina that had much more representation than they ever had before, much more influence than they ever had before, much more of a voice than they ever had. And the private sector was added as well. There are several representatives on from the private sector today, including the economic development community, the engineering and surveying community, and other communities that have a different perspective, but an important perspective when you're pursuing big things. And hopefully that'll come across a little bit later with some of the other slides. So we have a 34-member council. The statute link is there for you to look at your leisure. It's not too onerous to read, so I would invite you to look at. But it's very structured. It doesn't get into the weeds too much, but it gives the structure that the council needed to be effective in the eyes of the people who created it. Would add, at this point that the legislature, when they increased the membership of the council, designated 3 members from the House, appointed by the House, and 3 appointed by the Senate as part of their contribution to the work of the council. And those seats are typically held by either the private sector or local governments that they feel are not represented at the council table. This I can't fit 34 people on a slide, so this is my my best effort at giving you a representative sample of those folks. So the council is a body that's very representative of the community. You have, for example, local government represented there by Davidson County and the city of Greensboro. You have state government represented by DOT, one of the big players, DPS, public safety, big player, DENR or DEQ, a big player. But you also have some of the other important voices there, such as the League of Municipalities and the Association of County Commissioners, who help drive the policy side. They're not technical people necessarily, but they're very policy oriented. So they know, they have a sense of whether something's going to work. They don't know how through the technology, but they know what's important from a policy perspective. And then you've got the private sector, and these are just a couple of the private sector folks represented. Duke Energy and GPI is a services firm in the Charlotte area. And, you know, again, like I've said before, my favorite is the Office of State Budget and Management. And the reason they're important, again, is because whatever's stated at the council table could turn into a budget request. The council is not a funding body, but it is a body that can make statements about what is important and have backup information to emphasize why it's important. And the state budget folks listen to those things, especially since it's a consensus based decision that is resulting in a budget request. The University of North Carolina system's represented through the UNC office. So one of the campuses is represented among the 16 campus area. I think that gives you a glimpse of how the council is structured. The next slide really gets into the structure, and I'll just say that a lot of the definition here is actually in the statute. On the left-hand side of the screen, are the user committees represented on the council, and those committees meet roughly on a quarterly basis. They're very active, especially the local government committee, I would say. They meet virtually before and since COVID, but there's probably 100 people on these calls, and it's a very lively conversation. And their perspective, was important in the beginning, but it becomes more and more important as we look at how to build out statewide data sets, because a lot of the data originates at the local level. Just as an aside here, one of the pieces of courage that talks about, if you remember, sit down and listen, to be quiet and sit down and listen, is because early on in the council, in the bigger version of the council from 2001 onward, the state agency is not really listening to local governments. And it was obvious at the council table. It wasn't confrontational necessarily, but invariably a state agency would talk about what they were doing within their department. And they made references to things that were important to local government, such as how they were getting the data. And so the question came up, well, have you actually talked to the local governments? And the answer, in a sheepish way sometimes, was, well, no, we haven't. And so that's the beginning, really, of the collaboration. Well, you're pursuing something that's broader than your agency, and yet you're not involving the people that need to be involved in the beginning of the conversation, not after you've accomplished it or done it, but in the beginning. So that was a learning process for all of us. The state folks were a little bit hard-headed. Well, maybe a lot more hard-headed than we would admit. But we overcame that over time to the point where we worked together in building big things and able to accomplish big things. So that lesson early on of you need to listen to us because what we have to say is important to the bigger picture, it kind of resonated with everyone at the table. So the rest of this chart, the State Government Users Committee is very active as well. All the major agencies are represented, even some of the smaller agencies, such as the Department of Insurance, for example, and State Board of Elections, and those kinds of folks. The federal agency committee is all the federal agencies that are represented in North Carolina, such as EPA, the Forest Service, USGS, some of the others. So they're very active as well. On the right-hand side of the chart are really the management and technical people represented on the council. And that first one is the Management Operations Committee. It basically runs the council in between quarterly council meetings. So it's responsible for producing letters that need to go to higher authorities in between council meetings, being interested in the budget process, even though the council doesn't have any budgetary authority. The Statewide Mapping Advisory Committee is probably the most active and the most diverse of the committees in terms of all the issues it looks at. So the SMAC, as it's called, is a committee that really looks at data requirements for the framework data sets, set standards, and all those standards and eventually implementation plans for those data sets come back to the council for the council's approval before they're acted on. So the SMAC has a very important role. The GIS Technical Advisory Committee works on technical issues such as cloud implementation and what agencies, either state or local, should look at in pursuing that. They're looking at big data, some of those big issues that any one of the other committees might not be looking at. I think the final thing I'll say about this chart before I move on is the working groups that are listed there. So what typically happens at a council meeting is the chair of the council, by the way, is appointed by the governor. The council chair really views the issues that come up before the council in a way that may result in a working group being created or a working group that exists being authorized to take on a new task. So that's basically decided at the council meetings. So that all those that are listed there are super active at any one time. They could go dormant for a period of time and then come back if something surfaces. So those are really where the work gets done. And for example, if there's an update to the ortho-imagery standard, it'll go to that working group that's listed there. That basically is going to work with the SMAC to update the standard and get it back up to the council for approval, just as an example. Maybe one final note before I move away from the chart is if it's not clear by what I've said so far, the council is an advisory body. It was created that way intentionally. It's not regulatory. So there's no fear in the room that the council is going to impose something on an agency, either a state or a local agency, that they have to abide by. There are no mandates created through the council. That's a legislative function, and it was never the intent of the council to be a regulatory or that kind of a body. So we've tried to adhere to that over the years. So one of the important things about the council when it started and under statute in 2001 is, well, what is our purpose now that we're fully inclusive of the whole set of stakeholders or the majority of the stakeholders? What should we pursue? And one of the things that they really wanted or decided to latch onto through conversations at the council table was, we have 100 counties with GIS data. We have 20 state agencies with GIS data. It's all kind of pigeonholed into their own websites, into their own silos. The taxpayer paid for all of that. How can we do a better job as a state in making that data more widely available? And what we need, and I'm speaking literally here, one of the council members said, what we need is one map. So roads are represented from DOT within this website, parcels from any number of counties up to 100 counties are represented on this website. So you don't have to go to each individual county to get to that information. You can, and it, this plays out in ways that you all, I'm sure, can understand. If you're faced with a Hurricane Florence on the coast of North Carolina and you need to grab parcel data for the 20 coastal counties, you don't want to go to 20 websites because the legislature is asking for impact. And this literally is something that happened in a previous hurricane. Is we were able to, through the resources of NC OneMap, we were able to come up with that an answer for the state budget office to present to the legislature to look at recovery funding by analyzing the parcel data, the imagery, and other data sets to determine, in a rough way, of course, what the degree of impact was for those counties. So that's just a really specific example of the value of having the data in one place. The other important thing, and I think I've shared enough of this with you, I won't beat a dead horse too much, but I love this quote. This quote came from now retired Chief Data Officer Carol Burrows. Data is shared at the speed of trust. So part of the council's growth as an entity from a child to an adult has been developing this this willingness to share as a result of trusting each other and handling of the data, such that we're not going to be selling your data. We're going to ingest the data into NC OneMap, make it available to a broad community, and that I think that has helped us be successful to the degree we are. So NC OneMap was developed as a vision. This is going back to about 2003 now at this point, and has been through several refreshes over the years, most recently refreshed technologically to work in the cloud such that we're not impacted by any particular server in North Carolina, for example, when a hurricane hits and maybe hits a spot in North Carolina where the servers are located. But fundamentally, it's about those data sets listed around that chart, which have been tackled in one way or another, maybe multiple times over the years. Imagery I'm going to talk about a little bit later, parcels and address points I'm going to talk about a little bit later. But these are obviously the fundamental data sets that any state would want to have statewide and be assured that it's up to date and so forth and maintained. And so, the genesis of NC OneMap is to make the most important, most useful data readily available 24/7 without restriction, without having to pay for it, et cetera, et cetera. Just to illustrate a little bit more, the parcels data is represented in the graphic there, but really we're all about free discovery and access to the data, being able as a user to count on that what you're looking at is the most up-to-date version of this data. Excuse me, and being able to bring data together in a maybe not necessarily as a one-stop shop because the data could be available elsewhere, but a first-stop shop for people such as a consulting firm working on a DOT highway project to look at what's available for that area first. The customers honestly run the full gamut, from professional engineers, foresters, teachers, students, realtors. The surveying community in particular is a big user, but it covers all the bases. And sometimes when you realize how much it's being used is the very minimum amount of time, thank goodness, that service is down for some brief period. And we hear from all the users we didn't know we had. So in a way, that's a good story. You realize who's using the data and what value they find in the data. So CGIA, my former agency, is the steward of NC OneMap. keeps it refreshed, keeps the technology up to date, and does that on behalf of the council, because at the end of the day, NC OneMap is a council initiative. Just to close out on NC OneMap, why does it matter? Well, it matters, as the council members would say to you if they were talking to you. Major investments have been made in this data. It should be readily available to anyone who wants to use it, whether it's a citizen that's attending a public hearing and needs to look at some data related to an issue, or if it's an agency that's trying to get their job done across, maybe a multi-county landscape and wants to look at the data for that multi-county area. So the underpinnings of all that is geospatial data via NC OneMap helps to make better, more informed decisions, improves the economic vitality of the state, because the data is available to folks like potential businesses that want to locate in North Carolina and that want to look at areas of the state that they might want to put their business. And I think through some of the key data sets, making the data available for public safety purposes, as embodied in the whole 911 and next gen 911 that I'll talk about in a minute. Okay, so I want to cover 2 or 3 of the major efforts, and just to illustrate what the council is about and how the community responded either to a problem or a need. And the first is imagery. That's probably the flagship effort. And I know you're not North Carolina natives, but I will share where these images come from. How's that? So image on the left is the Blue Ridge Parkway around a place called Grandfather Mountain. There's a road called the Lynn Cove Viaduct, which is built around the mountain, not through the mountain, which is kind of cool. I was there this weekend, actually. So that's a nice part of the western part of the state. The image next to it is a town called Spencer that has a transportation museum, and that's at the bottom of the screen. That's like a train, turntable kind of situation, if you're into trains. The image to the right of that is University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, a piece of the campus. Very, very active GIS users, by the way, the university itself does a lot with facility management using GIS. And the image on the right is really cool. It's Ocracoke Island on the Outer Banks of North Carolina. So now you have your geography lesson for North Carolina for the day. So let's get down to why imagery and what happened. So ortho-imagery, as you all know, is key to all kinds of function, both locally and at the state level. The council back in 2009 timeframe was presented with a problem. The local government committee said, certain counties aren't being maintained on a regular basis with imagery. So the imagery is aging out, even though the landscape is changing. And for any number of reasons, I'm not looking to judge anything here, but for any number of reasons, the county commissioners in some of those counties weren't willing to update the imagery every 4 years, in some cases every 8 years. And the local government committee came to the council with the problem. So we either figure out a way to address it through the legislature, or we find another method to fund this, either federally or some other method. So this map just shows the variety, or the variability, I should say, of the imagery in North Carolina in 2009 at the local level. So it's a local function. It has to be funded locally up to that point anyway. So if you go from, look at the center of the chart, Davidson County to Randolph County to Montgomery County, south of that, you've got three pieces of vintage of the data, which is not a good situation to be in when you don't know when something's going to be updated. If you're Wake County or Mecklenburg County, the big cities, you probably don't have much to worry about. But there's a lot of rural space in North Carolina, just like there is in Georgia. So it was a problem that had to be solved. We couldn't ignore it as a community. So we did. So the council authorized a business plan that was created in 2010. The business plan, as the contents listed there shows you, covered everything. What was the background, the use cases, what are we trying to accomplish, what's the cost, and what's a possible implementation plan, and it had various options there. So the purpose of creating the business plan was severalfold. One is we were looking to put in writing the problem, so we could shop the problem to folks, including the legislature, potentially federal sources. But we were fortunate in that the 911 board was sitting at the table at the council meeting, and they decided this is well thought out. All the community is on board with the plan. We have a need because the 911 calls were moving rapidly away from landline-based calls to mobile calls through cell phones, and we needed a consistent base for dispatching across North Carolina, the 127 PSAPs. So they took the plan. The 911 board took the plan. We presented to them, and they funded the plan on a 4-year cycle. That it started in 2012 technically, and has existed today, and I'll show that a little bit more of that later. So that was a fundamental document that was created through the council. So simultaneously, and really this predates the work of the council, is standards that would ensure a consistent product across the landscape in North Carolina. So this was a product of the Land Records Management Division of the Secretary of State's office. It is in the weeds to the nth degree on the technical matters, but it ensures a consistent product across the landscape. This standard is updated every few years. For example, it was updated to represent film cameras to digital cameras, and it's really a landmark piece of work, is in my judgment, about how best to implement this data set. Today, we are on the fourth 4-year cycle. It started in 2012, so we have imagery from the coast for 2012, 16, 20, and 24, and we're working on 2025 right now. I should say my agency's working on it. I'm not working on it anymore, but they're doing a great job. And it's really a collaborative effort, and to the nth degree, and it's a very technical effort. So you need to have all those kind of resources. We do it in cooperation where needed with the military bases in North Carolina, Onslow County there in the southeast, and that has Camp Lejeune. And in the central part of the state, Cumberland and Hoke and Scotland County, that's Fort Bragg. We have formal written agreements with them to fly the imagery, not get shot down, and produce the imagery for their purposes, but for our own, for 911 purposes as well. So the fundamental reason for doing this is emergency response, 911 response. So the PSAPs, the public safety answering points, the 911 centers are involved to the nth degree in this process, and they are the first user of the product when it comes off of the production line, and then ultimately it's shared through NC OneMap. But the product goes to the PSAPs first for integration into their operations. This, as I said, this is a collaborative effort that involves a number of the critical agencies that have a say in some technical aspect of the work. Our office manages it, but we have private acquisition contractors, of course, that fly the imagery. We have an online QC tool where the public safety answering points staff and the GIS staff review the imagery before it becomes final. So they're fully integrated into the process, and which enables good buy-in on the product once it's delivered. So look quickly, this image is going to change. So this is a 6-inch color product, 3-band. But a few years ago, we convinced the 911 board to add the 4th band, but because the price difference was so minimal. So now we have the 4th band for the entire state based on that 4-year cycle as well. So we extract that 4th band and make it available for folks who have an interest in that product. This is just the typical timeline. Right now, of course, we're in beginning the quality control process with the PSAPs, and we would typically deliver around Thanksgiving or first part of December, and we've gotten the process about as tight as it can get to enable the full review by everyone who wants to review it. So flown in the winter and delivered in late fall. Excuse me. So one of the recent things that we've done with the imagery is use machine learning to extract items on the ground, such as building footprints, swimming pools, those kinds of things, and be able to see where those objects are in space. And again, if a hurricane were to hit some part of North Carolina, we would have a ready look at what could have been impacted by that storm and potential value through looking at the parcel records. And this is just how you can get to the imagery. It's available in a number of ways to support the community. You can integrate it into an application. You can download portions of the imagery and so forth. The next data set that I'm super proud of is the parcels effort, and parcels are becoming more and more critical as time goes on, as the state grows and land is purchased by folks outside the state. It's one of the things the legislature is concerned about. So one of the keys to the parcel effort originally was having a method for assembling a statewide data set in a consistent way. So that's the gist of what I'll cover here. How are we doing on time, Tyler?
You got about 7 minutes left.
Oh, okay. I better also. Sorry. Okay. So I won't spend a lot of time on this. There is background to the history of the parcels effort that started back in that modernization period. We had an opportunity with an EPA grant of $500,000 to develop a transformer and bring parcel data at the county level in a consistent way into that transformer without having the county property mapper folks having to change their data model, which was kind of the key to getting support. We achieved full participation in 2015. We were fortunate to win a ERISA award back in 2016 for the statewide project. And now we're basically in maintenance mode. And what's really gratifying about this is that the counties are updating things on a quarterly basis, which eventually I think we'll get to monthly updates, but right now we're at quarterly, and it seems like everybody's finding the process simple enough to achieve that on a quarterly basis. We had a pilot effort with the EPA grant that involved 25 counties in North Carolina, not all urban, not all rural, very representative. So we knew what we were getting into once the pilot effort was finished. So the next two maps are look similar, different colors, but similar. This shows the fact that everything is pretty up to date statewide, with the exception of a few counties here or there. Sometimes that exception is based on staff turnover, transitions from one system to another that delay their update. But for the most part, very pleased with what's happening. This is an image, obviously, from almost a couple of years ago. But this is a current one. It shows the same kind of pattern with people continuing to update on a regular basis, which, again, super, super gratifying. Lots of benefits for parcel data. Won't go through these in detail, but lots of benefits for having that in place. And we're looking forward to the day when there's a federal or a national data set of parcels, and I think we're ready to contribute to that in a significant way. Sometimes you don't know what you're going to need to deal with, and this is just an example of how some of these fundamental data sets are used. And this is broadband, where we we're in a position to counter the FCC's representation of areas that needed to have broadband. Those dots in red were addresses and locations that weren't in the FCC data that we were able to add to the FCC data, and you see that in the lower left and lower right. So what that meant to North Carolina is we were able to increase the funding from the federal government by $500 million as a result of being able to counter their data with more accurate, up-to-date, complete North Carolina-based parcel data, which when you want to talk in real numbers to folks like legislators, it's good to be able to say you were able to add $500 million to what the state received. I'm going to go quickly through this because of time, but one of the major efforts we've been involved in recent years has been Next Generation 911, and the key data sets are listed there. I would call out address points as being the next important data set, not only at statewide but national. We've achieved it through Next Gen 911 at the state level. Have now close to 6 million address points. That number's a little dated, but the next gen data from the PSAPs is being updated on a 30-day cycle, where the 911 board is leading that and CGI is supporting that. So that address point data, if it changes for a particular county due to growth or just regular updates, we get that updated within 30 days. And then with the next gen data, it becomes, as I've shown a little bit earlier, next gen data becomes important when broadband comes along. So you have verified address point data from next gen, for example, that can feed the broadband process that leads to an increase in funding for broadband. This is just an example of unserved locations in North Carolina based on addresses. And in terms of readiness, we've contributed to the national address data set. We're able to contribute to that on a regular basis, and we hope that effort nationally will continue to gather steam despite the challenges the federal agencies have at the present time. I want to touch on building footprints for just a moment. Building footprints was a data set that was not necessarily a priority for emergency management. They had funding challenges there. I think they've overcome those challenges at this point, but having building footprints is really important for a number of agencies based on the stakeholders you see there. So we used artificial intelligence to create the building footprints that are shown there in an automated way. So it's not people digitizing or manually doing things. But it started with, just like the imagery did, a business plan to update. So the building footprint data set is following along the imagery preparation on that quarterly or on that 4-year cycle to achieve an update of the building footprint data. Okay, so that was a little bit fast. I hope you were able to get most of that. There's a lot going on, obviously, and a lot of opportunity, I think, going forward. One of the things I didn't touch on very much that I could have, and part of the road ahead, is the council tackled infrastructure data and the lack of accessibility to that data, and spent a couple of years studying the issue, getting the right people, the utility companies, and both the private and public side of the utility companies at the table. And it was driven by council members that were in the economic development community that were having trouble accessing data for projects, which, could keep a community from getting, an important business in their area if they can't determine what the infrastructure data looks like and they can't get to the data. Recognizing there's security issues, and everyone acknowledges that, the homeland security aspect of this is not trivial, but is there a way we can work together? And quite honestly, we never found that way to overcome the issue. So we're kind of let it table or let it simmer for a little while, and we'll go back to it. But it's one of the outstanding challenges, I think, in North Carolina. We always want to be a part of the policymaking side of things and make geospatial part of it. And we hope that greater awareness, through greater availability of the data, accessibility of the data, will get us there. We want to contribute to the future NSDI. NSDI is National Spatial Data Infrastructure. For those of you who might not be familiar with the term, but it's an effort to bring state and local data together in a national way to look at issues that go beyond state boundaries, for example. And I think the 800-pound gorilla here is, or maybe that's an analogy, but everybody is concerned, I think, about what AI do to use the data in ways that maybe the data is not intended to be used in. So one of the things that we're looking at both at the state and nationally is what are the AI tools going to try to get to? And I think we need great metadata. We need great data, but we need great metadata too. So those things are important. There are probably a lot of other things that AI is going to impact us with. So that's pretty much what my view is going forward. I hope this has been helpful, and if we have time for any questions, glad to take them. Otherwise, it's been great to be a part of today, and I'm also super excited about being on the Georgia Geospatial Advisory Council, and I was appointed to that earlier this year, and very grateful for that opportunity, and look forward to making a meaningful contribution to that. So, thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, we have, I can stay on for a couple minutes. If anybody has any questions, feel free to unmute and chat or put your message in the chat.
I don't really have. I do want to say thanks, Tim, for presenting here. I've always been kind of jealous of all of the data and things that are available to the state of North Carolina as adopted North Carolina GIS community member. We made abortive attempts, I guess, with things like the Georgia GIS Clearinghouse that kind of stalled out and whatnot. So, hopefully we can kind of see similar actions come to fruition down here in Georgia. I know Susan and Natalie and our GIO's office has been kind of working to build support for that. I did have a question. So here in Georgia, we do have similar change to our laws that exempted GIS data from the standard open records request, that you can charge a reasonable fee, and I don't think reasonable was ever defined, that incorporates not just the cost of reproducing said data, but the cost of maintaining the data, acquiring the data, as well as all the software and hardware needed for such activities there. And that was kind of a selling point across the state in the 90s and early 2000s to get local governments involved in GIS is, hey, you can resell your data to recoup your cost. Did you have any good strategies? Because I think there's still some mentality of that here in Georgia to overcome and show that really, my experience has been that the benefit of making that data accessible, the ROI far exceeds anything you can get from selling it.
Right. I don't have any particular special insight into arguments. My sense in our state is just when the internet really took off, websites became commonplace, the argument just kind of went away. So there was never a majority of the counties that were trying to charge. It was maybe like a dozen. But the last one that I heard was on the coast, and they were trying to charge, I think the figure was something like $40,000 for access to their parcel data.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. But that's only one. That's the only one I heard of out of 100. So I honestly don't know if they're still doing that or not. it just seems like, the value of making your data available could impact you in very positive ways through, business development in your community.
Well, that's what I think Fulton County here in Georgia realized is they were one of the first counties to really kind of set up an open data portal that I know of. And in talking to, I don't know if you are familiar with Carl Anderson or not. He was the former kind of GIS manager for the county.
Right.
He said that the economic impact of making that data available so stores could find locations easier and developers could get access to the parcels and utility data easier. Just the boon to that was far exceeded anything they could sell the data for at the time. That's why now, you can go pretty much pull every, publicly available, there are limits obviously for national security and homeland, all that stuff, but right off their website. So
yeah.
Awesome. Any other questions?
See, one just came in from Brad specifically with address points. How did you get, and then suddenly it dropped off my screen.
Buy-in, or how did you get full buy-in from all of the counties? You said at the county level, we've had a hard enough time getting all of the cities who assign their own addresses to share their address points with us. Some have limited GIS resources to their credit.
Well, I think there were several attempts dating back probably a decade or so. The FCC and an organization called NTIA looked at broadband like a decade ago, which involved looking at address level service availability. And so I think the critical, so it's helpful in broadband to know who's served, who's not served, which I think is important for a community. But I think the bigger player ended up being the 911 board and getting address points for next gen 911. So they ran that through the public safety answering points, the 911 centers, who then communicated with whoever the address creating organization is within those local governments, whether it's a city or a county. So I think the emergency response use case is just the strongest.
Well, doesn't Next Gen 911 kind of start to push that as almost a requirement that you have to share that data, and that's why they're standardizing the data model?
Yeah, it is. And a lot of effort went into standardizing that data model with MENA over like a decade, I think, before folks were asked to provide their data. But money didn't change hands. That's one of the things that I think we've been really fortunate with over the years is the counties didn't want to be paid for their parcel data. I think the culture just created a sharing sense that if we as state agencies had been overbearing, mandating and having the legislature mandate, I think it would have turned into a really bad situation. But the fact that we took really the opposite approach. And honestly, I think providing the imagery to all those counties free. The counties don't contribute anything to the imagery program, and they get imagery on a regular cycle. It's saved. We've had anecdotal comments from them that it saved them contracting time and resources and money. And to get to back to Brad's question, I think that creates a sense of we need to share this data because we're getting imagery, really good imagery on a regular cycle that helps our county or our city in many ways. So I think it creates the environment where people want to share.
This is Sherman Green. I'm down in sunny Warner Robins, Georgia. I started at the University of South Carolina in fall of 1989, taking cartography and computer mapping classes. My very first job ever was a cartographic aide, actually, for the U.S. Geological Survey, and I went on to work for the SCDOT. During the early 90s, we were not using the term GIS for the most part. It was a computer mapping and cartography. Was a state of, in your earliest slide, you said you guys are using GIS in 1977 and the late 70s. Were you guys that far out in front of everybody else? Where you had made the connection between mapping and data?
Well, there were other states that were following along that same path. Minnesota and New York in particular. I think Washington State maybe, and Kentucky. And so I mean, cartography was still important. You still had, as you know, you still had to produce a good base on which to digitize something from. So that base of cartographic products that we were using at the time to create that digital GIS data in those early years, in the early 80s, for example, was good stuff. So we needed people to have that cartographic skill set, which I think is still important, quite frankly. But we didn't talk about things like cartography so much as we talked about what's it going to take to get a good base to enable something to become digital and not create bad digital data from bad map representations. So we always cared about the cartographic piece of it for sure. The darn software didn't work as advertised.
Well, I some would argue that it doesn't still work as advertised all the time, but that's neither here nor there.
Right. Or starting processes that failed sometime overnight.
Well, I also think back then that the range of potential applications was broader, right? Because you had Intergraph, you had Autodesk, you obviously had Esri, you had there was one out of England that I can't think of.
Small World, maybe.
No, it was another one. I know we had it here in Gwinnett County. And of course, you had Map Info, Atlas. I mean, there was just a wider range of potential apps. Now we're that's gotten filtered down as larger integrations have happened, and with pretty much your choices is Esri's platform or open source.
Yeah. And we started with a company called Comark, which is out of the San Francisco, Berkeley, California area. They were their claim to fame at the time was they were heavy in the timber industry. So the use of GIS for timber, looking at timber stands and what needed to be culled and all that kind of stuff. But we moved to ESRI in I think 87. It was right before I got to the agency. I don't know why. What the decision making there. Probably didn't see the development of the products in the Comark world keeping pace with what we thought it should be.
Tim, you're a very knowledgeable guy, and I could probably ask many questions. I do more federal work, and I've done federal DoD work for the last 25 years, but there was a spell here in the early 2000s doing federal work